There we go.
And we're live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the This Is Not Therapy Hour. My name is Marie. I'm a coach at Effective Artistry, and I'm joined as ever by Brandon Tessers, LCPC and Clinical Director of Effective Artistry. So, this, as the title says, is not therapy. It's an open conversation and a chance for you to ask questions of Brandon. And I will put some questions to him that we have gathered from people about a topic of your choice. We have a topic lined up for today, but if you're in the chat and you want to ask a different question, don't worry about going off topic. We'll just go where you'd like to take the conversation. A little bit about Effective Artistry. It's a therapy and coaching practice based in Northbrook, Illinois. And for therapy, therapists can work with people anywhere in the state of Illinois. And for coaching, we can work with people anywhere in the world, as long as you have an internet connection. I think that's it. If you are going to put comments in the chat, whether you're joining us from Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, just bear in mind that the comments will appear under your name. So you may want to keep that in mind. That's it, I think. How are you doing today, Brandon?
Good. Frantic and running behind as always. My major bugaboo that I still have not had much luck adjusting. But as you know, that's why we popped on 5 minutes late, because I was running late with my session beforehand. But other than that, good. How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm having a few rest days before I go back to work. So
Nice.
back to work tomorrow. Yeah. So yeah, very well. Today's topic is one that might be of interest to parents in particular, but anybody who works with kids, particularly tweens and teens. So Margaret Schaus, one of the therapists at Effective Artistry, has been what would you call it? Collecting information or gathering questions or ideas for topics on TikTok. I can't think of the word I'm looking for.
Soliciting?
Soliciting, that's the word. Yes, thank you. So if you're on TikTok, you can find Margaret at Effective Artistry, and you can put questions to Margaret there, and she'll collate them and gives us topic themes to discuss. But yeah, today's topic is talking to tweens and teens and how to adjust as family dynamics change as your kids grow older. So I know you have you've been running a neurodiversity affirming parenting group. So I wonder if this is something that's come up.
Oh yeah,
in the
it's a
parenting group.
large part of it. Yeah. Because really,
Yeah.
whenever we're talking about something as neurodiversity affirming, that means we're going to talk a lot about communication and how to communicate with people, because it means neurodiversity means everybody's different, which means the only valid way to really get useful information about somebody is from them. And the thing that gets in the way of that is communication.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not a parent myself. I should state that at the outset. But I have been a kid. I do remember. And I guess there's always that tension between wanting to give your kids the freedom to grow up and also wanting to keep them close. And on the flip side of that, as a kid growing up, you want to explore the world and push boundaries a little bit. And so I guess there can be a bit of conflict, if that's not too strong a word, at home.
Sure.
Around that. Yeah. So we have a few questions. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Great. No, please. That'll help me from just, instead of trying to give a general discussion of what are our questions.
Okay. So how can parents work with changing family dynamics as kids get older? So I guess navigating adolescence and all the stuff that throws up in a household. Kids going through physical and emotional changes and how that impacts people around you.
Yeah. Well, a good question. And I guess I will say some not general, but like that's my 15-month-old. I know I've been working from home more lately to be around more, but it might be a net negative in terms of the amount of times that he's like hard for my wife to corral because he knows I'm here and he hears my voice and he wants to come and get in here. So a big part of this is about our communication, right? Like not just our communication with the kids and whatever, but all of us, the language that we use, the way that we conceptualize things, which directs what we pay attention to and what we don't and all that stuff. So things like a family dynamic, for example. That's a good question. So, a term like family dynamics, as an example, it's a construct. All these things that we're talking about are constructs. Even adolescence is a construct. And I want to be clear that when I say that, I don't mean, and therefore we should throw it away, or therefore it means nothing. Constructs are useful.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have constructed them if they weren't useful. It is useful to lump people who are between the ages of 13 and 19 together, roughly. Does that tell you anything about a given individual 16-year-old? No. But it's still useful to lump them together, partly because we couldn't have conversations like this at all otherwise, if there wasn't a way to talk about teenagers or adolescents or whatever. But part of the problem with the way that we talk about this stuff is that two things. One, it creates a sense of inevitability for people, meaning if we say teenagers are defiant, for example, defiance, which is also a construct. And let me clarify, when I say construct, I just mean it is a way of evaluating or describing a thing that is debatable, that it depends on perspective, it's subjective, right? Like, so if we were to say they're arguing is a construct, even though we might agree, like two people yelling at each other and who have different positions and are trying to get the other person to accept theirs, like that's difficult to debate, right? They're yelling, although we'd have technically yelling. Like the point is, none of this stuff is invalid. It's just we got to talk about it until we reach a point at which we can both say, yes, that is undeniable. We agree. We would both say that that's yelling. Then we don't need to talk about whether it's yelling or screaming or whatever. But if I say yelling and you say screaming, okay, well then what's the difference? We got to evaluate. What do you mean by screaming? What, et cetera, et cetera. So in this particular case, it causes a lot of problems because people have a sense of, like I said, two things. One, inevitability, that adolescents will be defiant, that all teenagers hate their parents, et cetera, or at least will say they do or whatever. The second is that it creates the idea, the image, the illusion of a causal effect, like a causal relationship, that one thing causes another. Meaning, if we say something like all teenagers are defiant, well, what's the one common denominator we just identified between all those people who are experiencing or exhibiting what we would call defiance is that they're teenagers, which means that we're implying that being a teenager makes you defiant, which means that when a given teenager is experiencing or exhibiting behavior that we would, even if we would agree that that is defiant behavior, we're very likely to focus in on, yes, because they're a teenager, meaning we focus in on them. We don't focus in, for example, on what is it that they are defying? Because you take the same teenager, the same individual person, and you tell them to do X and they'll do it just fine, and you tell them to do Y and they'll defy it. So there are variables that matter other than that. So when we simplify things, which we have to do, I'm trying to be clear because I think people sometimes feel like I'm criticizing them for using this language. It is necessary to use this language. It is important and useful. We couldn't do the things that we're doing without it. And it's limited. Things can be useful and even necessary and still not be perfect in every way. Gotcha. I'm saying this to enable the conversation, but also because that's a big part of what's happening in a lot of these cases, is that people have an idea of perfection, and anything that isn't that must therefore be bad. Where
are we talking
really
about parents or kids here?
Yeah. Well, in both cases, just people generally, because that's a big part of the secret here. Not secret, it's just what I have found useful for people is to remind them children are not incomplete adults. I say this over and over. They are human beings. You don't have to make a lot of guesses about what they're experiencing, because either you can reference your experiences if you find the right way to make that connection, or you can ask them about their experiences. Like, even the way that this is set up, and it's not us, it's this whole industry, like this whole field is, well, my child is saying that they don't like this, but the experts say it's good for them, and I'm going to listen to the expert instead of listening to my child.
Yeah.
And again, not to say that we should never take information that other people have gathered through research or experience. Like, there's a reason people are considered experts and limited. And for all those people out there that are experts, whether they consider themselves to be or others consider them to be or both, just, I would suggest for all of us that it's worth working on accepting and embracing that you don't know, that you are wrong, and that it's still helpful and useful and good to say stuff anyway. Because I think otherwise it creates this this internal pressure of, well, I want to be helpful, or I wouldn't be trying to do this like in the first place. And so if I do anything that causes harm, that means I'm bad. And then I either stop doing the stuff that I'm doing, even though it is helpful in some cases and in some ways, or I become very resistant to the idea that anybody could ever suggest that what I'm doing isn't helpful or is harmful.
Okay.
Everything we say is helpful sometimes and harmful sometimes.
Yeah.
Because that's really all it comes down to. There is no way to do this correctly. Of course not. Like, what would I or anybody else say? Like, what is it that we're even aiming at? What would be the best outcome here? So, in terms of answering the question, what do you do with the changing family dynamics? I can make general statements like experts do, and I will. But know that my statements are limited, and I don't know your family. And whatever changing family dynamic you're referring to is, you're describing a set of specific experiences and specific behaviors. Mm-hmm. And if we lump those into a larger category, that's helpful, because then we can address that category, and it addresses a lot of things. But the larger the category we lump it into, the less helpful it's going to be in order to be able to do anything about it. So the central thing is tension. And it's not unique to tweens or teens. It's just tension. It's all human interaction. In fact, not even just interacting with other people. This is us ourselves. We are always at all times trying to do what seems best with limited information and ability to do that, right? Even instinct, which is a construct, we could explore as or define as an unconsidered response, but that would still be my brain and body as constructed without the intervention of conscious thought, doing what seems best to do in response to whatever the stimuli is, right? I'm breathing because my brain and body think it's better to breathe than not to, right? It's tension, and it's going to be wrong sometimes. So the best thing you can do is embrace that you're going to be wrong. That when something happens, like Marie, even you were a little bit shy about using the word conflict earlier as though it's a bad thing, because people will talk about it that way, right? Like, you don't want to overstep and suggest that people are in conflict, and they might get defensive and say, we're not experiencing conflict and blah, blah, blah. Well, whatever it is, you're going to experience some stuff you don't like. Call it conflict or something else. There's going to be stuff that happens that you don't like. That's good. Not meaning it's a good experience. It's an unpleasant experience.
Right.
But it's good that it happened, because it happened for a reason. And until the thing happened, you had no idea that there was something worth paying attention to there. So in the intro too, you were saying, like, we want to let them be free to live their lives, but also keep them close, which is a tension and construct, and a perfectly reasonable and like acceptable. No one would have issue with that. And then as soon as I point out what I'm about to point out, everyone's going to say, like, oh, well, that's not how we're taught. It still centers the idea that parents are in total control of what their children do.
Yes.
And we're not. We don't get to decide to what extent they explore the world. We get to decide what we do in interaction with them, what we say, what we help them with or hold them back from, but those are specific things that we're doing. Are we punishing them to hold them back from something? Are we physically restraining them, right? Like there's specific actions we take. So it will change. Just don't think about that as a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like when they push back on something that they didn't used to push back on, well, whatever it is that they're pushing, let's say a bedtime, right? A common thing. We've given you a bedtime. Now you're fighting with us about the bedtime and you didn't used to. Yeah, because it didn't used to be a problem, or at least it didn't used to cause them problems enough that it was worth them talking to us about. Or if it did cause enough problems that it was worth them talking to us about, they hadn't considered that the possibility of talking to us about it was even an option.
Right.
But by the time they're talking to us about it, it's enough of a problem that they think it's worth talking about, and they have considered that talking to us is an option. Well, here are two things that make it more likely that they're going to be, that those things are true, is if they feel safe with us, the bar for how big of a problem it has to be before they talk to us comes down. And if they feel like we actually listen and respond to the things that they are saying to us, not that we just do whatever they want, but we hear what they're saying and we're open to a conversation, then they'll consider that as an option more. And don't we want those things as parents? Like generally, don't you want to feel as though your children feel safe coming to you and that you listen to them? So
Yeah.
when they then do and they say stuff you don't like, if you treat that like it's a problem, then you're giving them a mixed message and saying, hey, sometimes it's actually not safe to come to me and sometimes I won't listen. And if I can't explain to you exactly what the difference between this and that is, then you just have to start making guesses about when it's something I will have a healthy and happy and enjoyable conversation with you and when it's going to be a problem.
And that's when communication is at risk of breaking down to some degree.
Yes. This is why we want to be able to explain what we're doing, not
Mhm.
because I need to justify what I'm doing as a parent. Like I like some things and I don't like other things. I don't need to point at research or use logic to explain why it's okay for me to like or not like those things. I just do it the way that I feel it should be done. It's when the other person then says that they would like it to be different. Now we want to explore our reasoning.
Yes.
Not because if
I
my
said
reasons are
so is
better.
not a good answer. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Because I said so is not really a helpful answer, and it's one that parents give all the time.
Right.
Because I
And
said
it's not
so.
a bad thing to say
Yeah.
that because
Yeah.
again, sometimes you just
You've been
either
bossed.
don't know how to explain it or you don't have the time right then and there or the emotional energy or the cognitive availability or whatever. Like you're not a bad person for saying that.
Mm.
Because part of what I'm trying to do so much is eliminate this idea of good or bad because that's what causes the problem. Because then we stop looking at the thing that actually happened. We're just evaluating it as good or bad, which is always debatable, which means now we're just in fights about whether what we're doing is good or bad. Instead of saying, well, this is it. This is what. So it's not bad to say that. And if you say that, the other person has no idea of how to distinguish what things are going to get that kind of response from you versus what things are going to get the other kind of response from you where you're happy to sit down and talk through it.
Yeah.
So we do it, and there's nothing bad with doing it. You're going to do that sometimes for all kinds of valid reasons, including sometimes that you're just tired and you don't want to, and you can't explain it or justify it more than that, right?
Yeah.
Just know that that's what happens. Now, when we can talk through it and give reasoning, again, it's not so that we can debate my reasons are better than your reasons, which is how some family dynamics go. Certainly that was the way I grew up. There's a reason I like to talk through and give reasoning and categorize things so much, right? It's because I want you to have a better understanding of how to interact with me because you care about what I like and don't like. You care about how I think of you and what I want you to do or don't want you to do. Doesn't mean that you think I'm right about it all the time, but you care. It impacts your life. And I care about you, which means that sometimes I'm going to be thinking, what do they want? And it's a lot easier if I can ask you than if I have to guess. But if sometimes when I ask you, what do you want? Or if sometimes when I say, I want a thing, and you tell me that you don't want that, and you can't explain why, which again is fine, just means that I don't know. Whereas if you can say, no, here's why I don't want that. Now the next time I don't have to just guess and feel unsafe about like, maybe I'm going to get shot down. Maybe they'll be upset. I can say, oh no, Usually they respond this way. They responded this way for this specific reason. This thing doesn't meet that specific criteria. Therefore, I can act as though they're going to respond nicely.
Gotcha.
I know that's a really long answer. And it all comes down to just talk to your kids and listen to them.
Okay.
And stop treating it like if they have some desire different than yours, that's bad.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's where a lot of the tension arises, that we all have expectations of how things should go. And then kids grow up and develop their own views on things, and they're exposed to different things, and their viewpoints change, and then there's disagreement, which is all natural and normal, but it's how we deal with that. Whether you're a parent, a carer, or a teacher, all of your
yeah. And everything we're saying is relevant to any interpersonal dynamics, any interpersonal communication. Because again, the major point is kids are just people. They're just people. They're not different than other people, except that they're younger. And there are some things that come along with being younger, like having less information globally. They'll have more information about whatever things they have more information about, whatever specific, but it takes time to acquire information. It takes time to practice skills. That stuff happens over time. So the younger you are, the less of it you have globally. But that doesn't really let us make a whole lot of like specific conclusions, right?
No, and I was speaking to a young client very recently, and I was reminded about how busy and complex teenagers' lives can be, how much they have going on. And they're not like happy, clappy, carefree. They've got their own.
Their lives are exactly as busy as adults' lives are.
Yeah.
And 5-year-olds' lives are exactly as busy because we are all alive for the same amount of time. Every second, I'm alive for 1 second per second, just like you are. And here's the thing where, again, the colloquial language is useful, but it started to create some misunderstandings, some widespread misunderstandings. If we say something like, I don't have anything on my mind, or, my mind is blank, or whatever, right? Stuff like that. That's not actually true unless you're unconscious. If you're conscious, then the resources you have are being spent. You can say, I did nothing over the last hour, which is a useful thing to say. It gives an impression to the person you're talking about what your last hour has been like. It's not literally true that you didn't do anything, even if all you did was sit in bed and breathe. But that's still, like you're existing. Their days are just as full. Their brains are just as full. Things are just as important to them as they are to us. And of course, there are differences like, when we get context, right? That each individual experience is more intense when you have fewer total experiences. So we can then turn that around and say, oh, kids are so dramatic and make a big deal about everything. They're crying over nothing and whatever. And it's true, given the context that we have. But when you have 10 total experiences in your life that you remember, one of them's a pretty big deal. Even if to us, it's like in the grand scheme of things, who cares? Like, think about if you are someone who had like crushes and stuff, and not everybody does, obviously, but if you were someone who had crushes and things when you were a young kid, think about how much that impacted you. Like, if your crush smiled at you, how much you thought about that, how you felt about that. Think about how you felt if your friends did something fun together and didn't invite you, how much you thought about that, how much it impacted how you felt. That's what they're experiencing too. And when you experienced it, like it or not, if anybody said to you, it's not a big deal, which mostly we can assume people are saying that to be helpful, right? They're saying, hey, I know it hurts, but don't worry, it's not a big deal. And maybe sometimes it does to some extent help. But also sometimes it tells you that they don't really understand what's going on with you and aren't really that curious to find out about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it makes you less interested in letting people know about things. Sorry, I don't know why this is going on. I'm going to silence this real quick.
Just looking through the questions here. Yeah, so kind of related to that, we have one question here. How can I feel how can I feel a part of my teenage child's life when I feel they want me to always leave them alone or give them space? Um,
I have a specific answer for that. But
mm,
again, I don't know what this is going to result in because we don't know
mhm.
the specifics. Just like we also don't know that that's a bad thing or they always want space is not true. Like
Yeah.
they live in the same house as you. Sometimes they're going to interact with you, even if it's to ask for something, right? Like they don't always want space. So just remember that's a useful way of talking about it. But if we then make the mistake of thinking that useful ways of talking about it are literally true, and we start you know, interacting with people as though they literally never want to interact with us, well, in this particular case, what does that mean? Is you lose all the information about the times that they do want to interact with you. Instead of saying, oh, they want to interact with me when they want something from me, which I can understand why somebody wouldn't like that and therefore wouldn't count as they want to interact with me, but they do. And then I can say, how can I use that? Meaning, if I say it's always this or never this, then I have one category of thing. And what am I supposed to do? I can't compare that or contrast that to anything else. If I can, if I have a separate category that they usually don't want to interact, or they often or frequently or mostly don't want to interact, want to be left alone, but sometimes they don't, then I can start to look, well, what is the difference between this and this, right? But as far as the practical answer to that, because this is a question that comes up all the time, remind me to come back to the unpractical about it because there's something I want to say. But practical answer to that is if you want to interact with them, you're allowed to want to interact with them. It doesn't matter if they don't want to in terms of you trying. Now, it might matter in terms of what you do then, right? Like if you want to hang out with your kid, go ask them, hey, I want to hang out. If you want to play a game with them, go ask them. If you want to talk to them, go ask them. If you want to go on a walk with them, if you want to do anything with them, go ask them. Now, if they say, no, leave me alone, then, you know, sometimes you respect that and you say, okay, what you and I want different things and it's fine for you to want what you want and I'll do something else. And sometimes you push and you say, I get that, but also the things that I want are valid too. I know you want to be left alone. I want to hang out with you.
Mhm.
And it's not that we should always do what I want, but it's also not that we should always do what you want. So maybe this time we leave alone, but can we talk in an hour or why do you want to be left alone? Because a very common thing is I'm just doing something right now or thinking about something or wanting to do something right now. When I'm done, then I'm open to something else, which again, same thing adults do, right?
Yeah.
Like
I'm busy.
sometimes your
Come back
kids come to
later.
you and yeah, they say you want to watch a movie and you're like, oh no, sorry, not right now. And if we explain why, then they have more of an ability to suss out when it's worth asking you or not. And if we don't say why, then they just start to think, just like this person asking this question starts to think it's some pattern and it's about me and nothing else than that. They just don't want to be with me. No, that's not how it works. If that is the case, then you need to do far more and different things than asking a question of me, right? Like if it is literally true that a person, that a child, teenager, whatever, never, ever, ever wants to be anything other than left alone,
Yeah.
never wants to talk to you, then I don't know what that would be, but it would be something a lot more severe than we're going to talk about in a generic like Q&A thing here.
Mhm.
But again, it's not that they want to be left alone. That is one way of looking at it. They wouldn't say they want to be left alone, or they might because they've learned that's a way that you respond to or understand what they're saying. But really, it's they want to do something that they either only can do or is preferable to do without you present. You're centering, they don't want to be with me. Well, what do they want to do? And again, a very common thing is they're playing a video game.
Yeah.
And in a lot of those cases, they actually would be quite happy to hang out with you if you were into playing the video game with them. If it's
I
multiplayer
think
together, you know.
I think a lot of parents and carers might I don't know, but I suspect a lot of parents and carers might jump to the worst conclusions if a child is wanting to spend a lot of time on their own. That there's something, there's something wrong. There's something amiss. They're up to something, and that's
Yeah,
not
which is
necessarily the case.
again, and we don't even need to talk about it through a neurodiversity lens, although let's say through a neurodiversity lens that yes, different people interact differently, different people are charged up or drained by different types of experiences, and sometimes being alone is a way for someone to rest and charge up, and there's nothing wrong with that. And yes, through the neurodiversity lens, we can say that that's more likely if someone is autistic, or that it's more likely for people who have rejection sensitivity dysphoria and social anxiety and all these different kinds of things. That's all true. Also, though, again, it's not that they want to be alone.
No.
It's that they want to do whatever it is that they are doing while they're alone. And that it might be that the presence of anybody else would inhibit or limit or restrict the enjoyment or benefit of doing whatever it is that they're doing. It might be that they don't actually care whether or not someone else is around as long as that other person is okay with them doing what they're doing. It might be that they actually would even prefer to have somebody else around if that person was engaging with them in the thing that they're doing in a certain way. People, generally speaking, don't actually like to be isolated. It's not how we're wired. It is important, just like it's important to sleep. And sometimes we say that we like to sleep because we're tired and we like to feel rested after the sleep. But the actual experience of sleeping is not a thing that you enjoy or don't enjoy, because it's not an experience that you have in any kind of way that you can enjoy it or not, right? So of course it is sometimes preferable for people to be alone. But generally speaking, all humans would rather have other humans around, as long as those humans are at worst not detracting from the thing that they're trying to do. And at best, they'll enjoy having that person around if they're doing it with them. One of the reasons that video games in particular become such an issue is because in a lot of cases, they're playing video games with their friends. And it doesn't seem that way, or we don't think that it's valid to play with your friends online like it is in person. But if you thought of it in the sense of, 40 or 50 years ago, they've got their friends in their room talking about stuff, and then you try and come in and talk to them and they don't want you to come in, then do you have a question about why they won't want to hang out with you? Like, well, they're talking to their friends about stuff. They don't want you to be there for it. What's so bad about that?
Yeah. Kids have a right to privacy too.
Yeah. I mean, everybody does, and
Yeah.
everybody doesn't. There's limits, and everybody has a different opinion on what those limits are, and it matters in the specifics, right? Like, I believe everyone has a right to privacy, unless that theoretically violating that privacy could in some way prevent harm to somebody else of a significant nature, right? Like, it's people. It's just people. Like, the only reason we say kids have a right to privacy is because some people have a default response that no, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to say, no, they do. And again, right to privacy construct debatable. But here's what will happen. People like to have certain things that they are not forced to share with certain other people. There are things that I don't want to talk with you about, Marie, and it doesn't mean that I don't care about you or that I think you're terrible or whatever, because that's just how it works. We compartmentalize. We have different relationships, different interests. And if you keep forcing your way in and forcing me to share that stuff with you, is that going to make me like you more or less?
Right.
Period. So sometimes you can say it's important that you get to see whatever they don't want you to see. You can say that, and it's valid. I might debate it, but whatever specific, it doesn't matter. You can do what you want to do. But just know, just like you, because they're people, if you had stuff that you didn't want someone to see and they came in and they forced you to share it with them against your, would you like that person more or less? Would you try harder or not as much to hide things from that person? Would you avoid that person more or less? They're just people. They respond the same way that anybody else would.
Right. Yeah. It's a question of trust and respecting their trust and knowing that that trust can be broken easily.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also
I guess,
just you do something that people don't like, then they don't like you.
yeah,
You do something
yeah, it's as
they
simple
like,
as
then
that,
they like
right?
you. And of course, it's tension and balance. You do some that they like and some that they don't, and you try and balance it to the best of your ability. And you disagree, and you're wrong sometimes, and they're wrong sometimes. Just figure it out.
Yeah. Onto something more specific then. There's two questions here that are kind of similar. So, how can a parent help a teen who's starting to build up a lot of anger, but they don't know where it's coming from? And in a similar vein, what can I do to help my teenage children who are starting to experience general anxiety and stress? What tends to generally work to support them? So,
I'm going to be a broken record here. I feel like my
talking,
answers are
talking.
help me be more practical because anger doesn't, there's no such thing as general anxiety.
Okay.
That's a useful way to conceptualize it from an outside perspective when the person who's saying that the anxiety is generalized can't understand the reasoning that some things cause anxiety and some don't. But it is impossible to be anxious about literally everything. That doesn't mean it's impossible to be anxious all the time. It is, although for a limited amount of time, because anxiety takes resources. It's not something you can do sustainably forever. It leads to burnout or meltdown or whatever, right? Sooner or later, something happens if you're anxious all the time. But even in those cases, you're not the same anxious all the time. Sometimes you're more, sometimes you're less. And even if you theoretically were the same anxious all the time, you're still anxious about a thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't like talking about it as generalized anxiety, even though that's a useful diagnostic tool, because what we're saying to somebody is that there is no reason that they're anxious. They're saying,
So,
no, I'm anxious
yeah.
about this thing. And
Yeah.
we say, no, it's not about that. It's about you. You're anxious no matter what. They're saying, well, but I'm thinking about this particular thing that's making me anxious. Yeah, but that's an unreasonable anxiety. It's not general. And if we tell them that it is, it causes problems. One of the problems that causes is the first part of that question sometimes causes, not always, sometimes. And again, we use this stuff because it's useful. I'm not saying don't ever refer to it as generalized anxiety. I'm saying if you call it that, just know that it's a useful term, but not actually literally true. It's still worth exploring. What are you anxious about? Let's see if we can identify some patterns of the things that you're anxious about, right?
And I guess that same question would apply to the anger issues too.
Well, the anger, the way that the question was worded anyway, is kind of the flip side of that problem. And this is my point, is like, it's not a do this, don't do that. It's this is useful to do in these ways, and it has the potential for these problems. And so this is the other option of something you can do, which is useful in these ways and can potentially cause these problems. If we talk too much about, oh, every anxiety is about something and some reason and whatever, then we might give the impression to somebody that all of their feelings and emotions and experiences must be justified by some logical narrative. I'm angry because this thing happened. Now, and that causes its own problems. In this case, my guess would be that that's not actually what's happening, in the way that this question was phrased. My guess would be here that the anger is, like you said, Marie, that the anger is being considered to be a general thing. They're just angry all the time. And we don't understand why. Because what we're ignoring is that, no, they're angry about this, and then they're angry about that, and then they're angry about that. There are things, but we ignore all the things and just say, nope, it's general anger, and we don't understand why. Now, can that happen? Sure. But if it is, it tells us a lot about what that person is defining anger to mean. How much have you really discussed and explored what we mean by anger? Because if I can use a word like anger or anxiety or happiness or any other, if I can use a word to describe all of my experiences 100% of the time, then I have a very, very broad definition of that word.
Right.
And that doesn't mean it's inaccurate, but it's not useful, which is why we're being asked this question in the first place. If you define that all as anger, what are you going to do about it? No, what are you going to do about all of your feelings all the time? There's nothing to do about all of your feelings all the time. So you can call that anger, but then scale the anger or something. divided up into subcategories so you can start looking. There are reasons. Maybe I should clarify this. There are reasons. We cannot know what the reasons are. It's important to know both of those things. If I'm angry, there are reasons for it. I and any human, we are too limited to be able to accurately say what exactly all the reasons are. Even if we can accurately identify a reason or some of the reasons, we don't know of all the other things going on what is relevant there, right? Especially people with like a history of complicated medical issues are very aware of this, of like, oh, this thing is an unpleasant experience. Maybe it's because of this. Well, that seems to have impacted somehow, but there's still something. Maybe it's because of this. Well, that seems to, maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's because of this, and just on and on and on forever. How much of your anger is because you haven't eaten enough? How do we quantify that? How much of your anger is because someone did a dick thing to you? Like, how do we quantify that? So start with what problem is the thing causing, meaning the anger. We wouldn't be addressing it at all if it wasn't causing some negative experience, either for the person themselves, which then they're communicating to us about, I'm angry, but they wouldn't call it anger and they wouldn't express it to us as a problem unless there was something they were experiencing that they don't like. And it could just be the sensation that they're describing as anger is inherently unpleasant. A lot of emotions are inherently unpleasant, just like pain is inherently unpleasant. But those things are inherently unpleasant for a reason. Just like pain is inherently unpleasant, they are our brain and body's best attempt to signal to us that something that's happening is going to cause a problem if we don't address it. So yes, it incentivizes us to figure out what is the thing that's causing the problem. So there are reasons. We cannot know what they are. It is literally impossible. And the only option is to make our best guesses about what they might be anyway, and then address them as though they are about the things that we are guessing they might be about. If those things help with addressing the initial problem, the reason that I called it anger and said that it was a problem, then great. If they don't, they might still be accurate. Maybe you're angry because your father abandoned you. Yeah, that could be accurate. And then what do I do about that anger? Well, you get some closure, come to acceptance. Okay. And if I do that and it helps, awesome. And if I do that and it doesn't help, it doesn't mean that the anger isn't in part due to that, or that's an inaccurate statement. It just means there's other things too. Even though your father abandoned you, sometimes you're angry and sometimes you're not. So that can't be the only variable. So just, again, get specific. A lot of this is just expert culture. What book do I read about the specific things that my child is angry about? There's no book about that. What book do I read about having an angry child? Ooh, tons of them. Which comes down to parents are terrified that they're doing the wrong thing, that they're being bad parents.
Yeah.
We want to be good parents and not bad parents. Yeah. I'm not going to try and convince anybody that they shouldn't want that. I agree. That's a good thing to want.
It really is.
What the hell does it mean?
Yeah.
Is it good to let your kids play as many video games as they want? Is it bad to let them play as many video games as they want? Both of those are debatable, because what does good or bad mean? Even if we get more specific and say, well, research shows that time spent playing video games correlates with higher IQ. And even if we then say, well, higher IQ is a good thing, which is still an opinion, but even if we accepted that, then that still doesn't mean that your individual child will be smarter than they otherwise would have been because they're playing video games. Parents are trying to make sure that we don't screw anything up, which is impossible, because screwing something up is just a way of talking about, oh, this thing happened that we don't like, and we can look backwards and say that had we behaved differently at some previous point, maybe it would have gone differently. Sometimes pretty confidently can say it would have gone differently. You know, if I didn't smack that glass of water, it wouldn't have fallen, is a pretty confident assumption. But you still can't know. Maybe someone else would have smacked it. Who knows? We get too tied up in hypotheticals, and we're in our own heads rather than just listening to our children who are real people. This was the thing I was going to say earlier when I said, remind me to come back to this.
Oh, yeah.
I see articles about this all the time, including people who are doing research, like actual academic research about this, are parents too controlling? Are parents these days too safe with their kids? Kids these days don't get enough opportunity to go out and make mistakes and explore things independently, and that's the problem. And what is hilarious to me about that is the hypocritical nature of the statement inherently. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with the statement. Many people agree, many people disagree. But what is the statement saying? If theoretically parents are being too safe and controlling with their kids, how would we know? Meaning, there is something that those children are doing that you think is a problem. They're not resilient enough when they're adults. They don't know how to find jobs. They're not independent enough. Something that the kids are doing, even as they become adults, that you are saying is a problem, which is fair. We can identify, it's opinion-based, but we can say what things we think are problematic. And then you're saying the root of the problem is because of what the parents did. And that in order for that problem to be solved, the parents must do something differently. But the problem that you're saying must be solved is that parents need to stop thinking that they should do everything to make their kids never experience a problem, which you're telling them is a problem and they should do something differently. It is paradoxical.
Mm-hmm.
It's just people's opinions.
Yeah. It's creating impossible standards for parents and carers too. Because,
literally impossible.
Yeah.
Not just like difficult to achieve. Literally impossible. Tell the parent whose child died in an accident when they were unsupervised for a moment that parents these days are too safe and controlling.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell do you mean? All the time, in all ways, parents should never supervise their kids? No, you just mean that you think there's an appropriate way in which to supervise your children and help them keep safe, and that you think that a lot of people do it differently than that. That's it. But we find out this stuff all the time, right? You should do X with your kids because it's healthy for them. And then 10 years later, actually turns out it's really unhealthy to do X with your kids. Because we don't know.
No.
So it doesn't mean you reject all the advice and opinions of other people. We're humans. We get information from each other. We can't find everything out on our own. Just stop treating it as though other people's opinions are more valid when it comes to personal experience than the people who are experiencing it. If someone tells you they're depressed and you say, no, experts say that kids these days are just saying they're depressed when they're not really. What?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Would you disagree with the statement that a child who's saying they're depressed is unhappy with something? No.
Yeah, that's the point to start from. That's the point from which to start questions, not to shut down the conversation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
When you talk to somebody, literally, as an adult, how do you feel when you talk to somebody and you use a word to mean something different than what they think the word means, even if they're correct about like the dictionary definition and you are incorrect? And so then their response to you is to criticize your use of that word and not respond to anything you just said. If you say, hey, will you hand me a Kleenex? And they say, actually, that's a facial tissue. And they don't hand it to you.
Yeah, that's not helpful at all. It just shuts down the conversation.
Okay, you're right. I used the wrong word, but I have crap coming out of my nose and I need something to wipe that on. Will you hand me something? So I'm depressed. No, you're not. Why are they telling you they're depressed? One of my most hated responses about all this stuff, they're just doing it for attention.
Well, give them the attention then.
Yeah. All communication is done at least in part to draw somebody else's attention to the thing you're trying to communicate to them about. It is a meaningless statement. Anything anybody does or says to somebody else is done at least in part for the attention. What a dismissive and ridiculous and unhelpful statement.
Yeah.
Also, if they're engaging in behavior which you don't like, and remember, by default, your kids want you to be happy with them at the beginning. Things can change over the course of a life, but humans by default, babies can't do crap. Like literally one of the things that makes humans the species that we are is that all the development that most other species do in utero or in the egg or whatever, that some of that we do after birth. That people will often refer to the first 3 months of a baby's life as the fourth trimester. They cannot do anything on their own. They're at the bare minimum of being able to function outside of the womb, meaning they can like breathe and eliminate waste and take in calories in some kind of a way. That's it. So yes, all babies want the people who care for them to like them, because we all are born into a state in which if the people who are taking care of us don't like us, we die.
Yeah.
Over time, that can change depending on how we interact with people. But your kids want you to like them. They want you to be happy with them to start with. If that's changing, there's some stuff going wrong. And it doesn't mean it's you necessarily, because it could be something that's happening in some other place. It could be that they're given messages about that they shouldn't like what you're doing, even though they actually do, but now they're pretending not to because they think they shouldn't, which is the same thing the parents are doing. You shouldn't do this with your kids, even if you actually don't mind it and actually kind of enjoy it, but you shouldn't. So you pretend like you don't enjoy it and tell them that it's a bad thing. I like playing video games with my kids. What's so bad about that? And sometimes I don't, but sometimes I do. I don't have to justify it. Anyway. Kids want you to like them, just like you want them to like you.
Yeah.
That's what it means to care about somebody. Define love or care in any way that doesn't basically mean my perception of your state of being impacts my state of being. If I think you're happy, that makes me feel better than I otherwise would have. If I think you're in pain, that makes me feel worse than I otherwise would have. So therefore, doing the things that I think will make you happy actually helps me to feel better, and therefore is a useful way for me to spend my resources. My brain will think about it that way. I will do things differently than I otherwise would, because even if it doesn't inherently benefit me, if I think it benefits you, and then I get the feedback that it does in a positive way, then I feel better, even though the thing itself is not something I give a crap about. I forget why I started this. I don't know. Just give up this idea that you are in control of everything that happens. That's what I was saying. They're doing it for the intention. Yeah, because they want your attention. And if they've escalated to doing something that you don't like, especially something you punish them for, but it is something that you in any way say to them is undesirable, which is an inherently, how do you feel when someone behaves as though the thing you're doing is undesirable or bad? You don't like that, right? Unless in very specific circumstances, which is a different thing. So why would they do that to get your attention? Because they haven't gotten it yet. They want to get it, just like I want to get people's attention by doing things that they like. I don't want people's attention to be on me because they're mad at me. I want their attention to be on me because they think I'm doing something good.
Yeah. So doing something for negative attention is kind of a last resort, right?
Yes. It means that they need attention. So yeah, if they say they're depressed and you don't think that they are and they're just doing it for attention, well then why isn't anybody paying attention to the distress they're experiencing before it got to the point where they think, accurate or not, that the only way to get somebody to pay attention to it and treat it as though it's valid and important is to call it depression? Where was it when it was sad? Did they say something or do something and you missed it? Or did they say something or do something and your response was, oh, well, not a big deal, not worth doing anything about, don't worry about it? And now they're escalating it to depression because they've been told that if you're depressed, that's a big deal and it's worth doing something about. And that's the only way they can get anybody to pay attention to what they're experiencing as though it is valid and important. Also, depression is just a word.
Right.
Yes, there is a condition we call major depressive disorder. Depression is just a word. Are they faking their tics? Okay. They're still exhibiting the behavior that we would call a tic. I think they're doing it on purpose. Why would they do it on purpose? There's got to be some perceived benefit there, right? And how are you so sure that people who have tics that are involuntary, that their system, their brain and body, isn't doing that tic in response to something that could be addressed in some other way? Like, for example, a lot of people's tics just happen to be verbal tics, happen to be in the language that they speak. So that can't be purely biological, right? Unless it's accessing some part of the biology which was shaped by their experience. It's kind of like the example I keep using is, I don't care how transphobic you are or how much you think like trans isn't real and blah, 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 blah. Can you disagree with this statement? There are some people who, for some reason, seem to not say, I won't even say seem. There are some people who, for some reason, enjoy identifying with a gender that is different from the sex they were assigned at birth. You be transphobic, you'd still say those people exist.
Yeah.
The debate is whether you think it's okay or what you think the reason is, or whether they're being honest about their reason. And who cares?
Right.
Oh, they're just doing it because of the way that the patriarchy impacts our culture. Okay, but that's also something you could say about literally anything. I only eat food the way I eat it because of the way the patriarchy impacts our culture. Like, because that is an indefinable thing. They're doing it for attention. Okay. So what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
They're doing it because it's popular. Okay. What's wrong with that? It all just starts with I don't think they should. Not anything you can actually point to. Well, research shows that they're harmed by it. First of all, no, it doesn't. Second of all, research is slow and generic and statistical. Even when it's good research, it doesn't actually apply to an individual person's life. Let's say that there was solid research that said 95% of people who drink coffee die 10 years earlier than people who don't drink coffee. Does that mean that we shouldn't let you drink coffee?
Oh, no. In my opinion, no.
Right. Well, research says that a bunch of these kids regret going through the processes that they go through. Again, that's made up research. It's not true. But even if it were, so lots of people regret going to college.
Yeah.
Lots of people regret dating. I've never met anybody who didn't have any regrets about dating some person they dated in their past. Should we then say that people shouldn't date? Or is it more specific than that and you're just picking a particular way of describing it? Even if the way you're describing it is accurate, it's still limited. So I'm saying all this because the biggest thing I can do is try and encourage parents to let go of the idea that what your kids experience is completely up to you.
Yes.
Oh, we have to let them fail. No, you don't. They will fail. They will fail plenty in ways that you cannot predict or prevent. You don't have to let them fail in the ways where you could predict and prevent it. They'll experience failure. You don't have to let them. We have to let them struggle. No, you don't. They will struggle. And again, in your life, if someone could have prevented you from a painful experience but didn't, do you like that person more or less? If they tell you it was for your own benefit, does that change? Or do you still like them less? Do you learn not to rely on that person because sometimes they'll let you suffer even when they know it's coming and could do anything about it, but because they think it's better for you in the long run? It builds character.
I was just going to say it builds character. Yeah.
All that means is you're doing something I want you to do, but that you don't want to do. And I think it's still a good thing to do.
Yeah.
How would we measure someone's character and whether it's been built or not? But my kids are certainly going to have to deal with people in this life and situations where they have to do things they don't want to do. How do I prepare them for that? Well, to whatever extent they have to deal with those things, they will have to deal with them, right? If you're saying that that is an experience that's going to happen, it will happen. It will happen to the extent that it happens. Why is that something you have to prepare them for by artificially making it happen before it actually does?
Yeah.
Not to say that there's never benefit to preparing people artificially in advance.
Yeah.
But if the way you're talking about preparing them for that, well, sometimes they're going to have to do stuff they don't want. So I'm going to make them prepare for that by making them do stuff they won't want. You might be right. And will they like you less or more? And I'm not saying that it's a parent's job to only have their kids like them. I'm just saying that that's the price you pay. Deal with it. when I yell at my kids to stop them from running into the street because I'm too far away and there's not enough time to sit and talk calmly and rationally about why we don't run into the street, and I just say, stop. And they get overwhelmed and nervous and scared because that's what yelling does. That's why it works, is because it scares people. Can I repair from that? Absolutely. But it still is going to make them scared of me for a moment. Even if they immediately connect that to why and why it's helpful and we repair and all that stuff, still for that moment it happens. And you do that enough, it's all ratios, right? If more of our experiences have you being scared of me, even just for a moment, then don't, are you going to want to be around me more or less?
Like when people say I was spanked as a kid and it did me no harm.
I would argue that anybody who's saying that is advocating for the spanking of children. And I would say that anything that turned you into a person who thinks that you should advocate for other people to spank their children, probably not great. And therefore it actually did harm you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because again, I'm not even saying that it is, there are cultural factors at play, right? And I certainly don't do that and wouldn't do that, but I'm not going to, that's the whole point of all of this, right? Is that everything is individualized and I don't know somebody else's context. I have my opinion. My opinion is that there are always better ways to handle it than that. That doesn't mean that I think that someone who does it is a terrible, evil person. Just like I don't think people should murder, I also think that anybody who gets to the point of murdering has been impacted by their environment and the choices that they are offered within the constraints that they didn't choose, right? Things can be bad without the person being bad.
And we default to what we know or what we've experienced ourselves.
Of course, what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
I don't know anything that I don't know. That's kind of the definition. All I know is
we've been spanked as kids, then unless.
And people only get up in arms about that because they think that what you're saying is if you're spanked as a child, that makes you bad in some way. Didn't hurt me any is a response to, they think you're saying spanking children hurts them, meaning makes them worse off in the long run, which means that they should be worse off. And how is anybody going to respond to that statement other than to say, screw you? Same way that anybody else, I played lots of video games when I was a kid. It didn't hurt me. Anything you did, you're going to say that. Unless we can get rid of this extra piece of being good or bad.
Yeah.
If I do X with my kids and they like it and I like it and it causes no problem, then how are we going to identify that that was a bad thing to do? Except to say that what other people's opinions of it are, or what people think it might lead to later on. But even when there's good evidence to suggest that it might lead to that, it's still statistical and doesn't mean anything about what my particular family is going to experience. And it, again, doesn't mean I ignore that stuff and don't listen to it at all. It just means what you do as a human, you take in information. And especially these days, the bulk of the information that you're taking in is being filtered through other humans to you. Because we know way more than any one person could figure out in their lifetime. We can only get that stuff. Even language itself, it's all filtered through other people. So you take all that in and it impacts you the way that it impacts you. And then you have impulses and desires and reactions and responses. And you just trust that those are the best that they can be, unless you can identify a specific reason that it might not be. But once you start saying my impulses can't be trusted at all, then you just can't do anything at all. So think of it this way. What is pain? Why do we have the ability to feel pain? Because it's our brain and our body making its best assumption that this is, if not addressed and changed, something that will cause us greater harm in the long run, potentially even killing us. Is that always true? No. We're constantly doing things that hurt because we think it's actually better for us. If I'm diabetic and I prick my finger to take my blood, I'm doing that because it's helpful. I believe that it's helpful to me, but it still is going to hurt. Well, here's the flip side. People will talk about that. I don't ever hear people talking about the flip side. What is enjoyment? Why do we feel it? Because our brain and our body is doing its best to assess that this thing is actually something that is good for us to do in the long run, and that we'll be better off the more that we do it. Are we always right? No. But unless you can identify a specific reason that you're not, best to just assume that you are until you learn otherwise. And that's back to the beginning. Problems. You interact with your kids in a specific way because you think it's the best way to do it. And then if and when something happens and you connect it to the thing that's been happening, oh, okay. Doesn't mean what you were doing was bad. It means there's tension. You go too far in a direction, you get corrected. Ridiculous example, but I've been having pain in my shoulder and in my arm that just don't quite understand on my left side consistently. Well, guess what I just realized? You might have even noticed me fiddling with this at the beginning of when I cross my legs. You won't be able to see it. When I cross my legs when I sit, which I frequently do, in large part because of the size of my body, I'm tall and how chairs are built and whatever. If I cross right over left, it's a lot more comfortable. I can fold them over more. If I cross left over right, it doesn't bend all the way and it's more like a figure four.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, I'm more likely to cross right over left. And in the chair that I'm sitting in, which has an arm to it, which I've been sitting in more recently as I've been working from home more, if I cross right over left, that means I'm leaning to my left more. And therefore, my left elbow is on the armrest.
Yeah.
And my right elbow is not. So there's some pressure for hours and hours a day on my left because most of what I'm doing when I'm sitting in this chair is talking, not typing. I'm sitting like this. Does that mean I'm bad to have sat like this? No. But I shouldn't have sat like this? No. I should have changed it before? What possible reason would I have ever had to even have noticed that I do this? But when it starts to hurt, and then I start thinking, what is it? Did I overwork myself? And I try different things and I keep thinking, and eventually I think, oh, maybe it's this. And because of that, I sometimes force myself to sit differently. And if the pain gets less, does it even matter whether my theory was accurate, that that's why it was happening?
Right. If it works, it works.
Right.
Yeah.
So do I need to be able to identify it's bad to sit that way before it causes me a problem? No. Is it beneficial to be able to do that sometimes? Sure. Yeah. Identify it before the problem means you prevent the problem. Great. But you can't do that all the time. You can't notice everything. So when a problem happens, you don't say, dang it, I forgot to prevent this problem. You just say, oh, this is good information. I should do something about this now. If you treat it as, oh no, I'm bad because I didn't prevent this problem, all that does is makes it when anybody points out a problem to you that you have now been incentivized to argue with them about whether what they pointed out is a problem or not. If your kids say to you, I'm upset about this thing, and you think you're bad for not having prevented it, you are now incentivized to tell them that either they aren't actually upset about the thing or that they shouldn't be. Instead of just saying, oh, I didn't think that was problematic, but now you're telling me it is. Let's explore it. Can we definitely change it the way you want? No, not always, but let's think about it. We just didn't have reason to think about it before. Or sometimes it is something that I've thought a lot about and the kid's not bringing any new information to me. And so then it's like, yeah, nothing's going to change here because I've already considered it. I hear you out still because maybe you know things that I don't. But if you're already telling me stuff that I've already considered, like, I'm probably not going to change it. And sometimes I change it for no other reason than because if not, they're going to be real whiny about it and I don't want to deal with that. Thing. Just like sometimes they're going to do stuff because if they don't, you're going to be some kind of a way that they don't want you to be.
Yeah.
Just relax.
Nobody likes being in the room, but probably clean your room than listen to somebody berate you for not cleaning your room, right?
Exactly. That's just what it is to be human. It's all tension. So just everyone relax.
Relax.
If you relax, then you can try things.
Yeah.
If you relax, if you do something and it results in something that you didn't want, I don't want to hurt somebody. I don't want my child to not like being around me. And I'm doing this thing and I'm doing this thing. And then all of a sudden it becomes apparent that doing that thing resulted in them or contributed to them not wanting to be around me. Well, what's the most logical thing to do is to say, oh, good to know that now, because now I can make adjustments and change it so that I'm getting what I want as much as possible. If when I notice that, I feel bad, I feel shame and guilt, oh, I'm the worst. That makes the cost of noticing it go up, which means I do it less. which means I don't improve as much as I otherwise could have, which means if you are feeling bad and guilty about having done something that resulted in something you didn't want it to result in, then you're actually keeping yourself from getting better at that. You feel bad because of the outcome, and because of how bad you feel about the outcome, you're making the outcome happen more. It doesn't help anybody for you to feel guilty about it. All it does is communicate to other people, oh, I didn't want that. Maybe if they don't believe you, no, you did. No, look how bad I feel. Look how bad I feel. I really didn't. And again, that's fine too. Just know what the results are. Anyway, we're going way over. I should wrap up.
We are, yeah. I just wanted to come back to the question that was popped in the chat by Coach Fritz. Hello.
Hello.
Which was, how can grandparents understand the parents' agendas and support them?
Ask them and talk to them. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And you can't do it with everything. Every little thing you do, oh, I'm going to, the parents say, give them some cereal for breakfast, and you do. And then later the parents say, no, not that cereal, this other cereal. Like, we don't think, just like we're saying, we don't think about every little detail. We just do our best. But again, approach it the same way. Now it's still talking about parents and kids. It's just parents and their adult kids who also have kids. So if you have reason to think that those parents might have an opinion about what you're going to do, then you ask them. And sometimes you're going to assume that they don't. You won't even consider that they might have an opinion about what you're going to do, and you do it, and then you find out after the fact that you're wrong. When that happens, welcome it. Oh, good to know, just like we were just talking about. I did not think that would upset you. Now that I realize that it upsets you, I want to know as much as I can about it, so I change what's happening going forward. Instead of, no, you're a jerk for getting upset at this.
Mm-hmm.
Just talk.
Yeah. And I guess, I don't know where I was going to go, but let go a little, I guess. Let go of the need to be right. And the need to
Just deal with things for what they are and the impacts that they are having. Deal with the things that people are feeling. Don't worry so much about whether they should or shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, or whether what's happening should or should not be happening, should or should not have resulted from what was done. It doesn't matter. It did.
Yeah.
Deal with the reality of what's in front of you. If I don't like a thing, I don't like it. Yeah, if you talk to me and push me, maybe something I don't like will change into something I do, but maybe it won't. So just know that's a risk you're taking. And therefore, if you understand it that way, am I going to push for my kids to do things that they don't want to do? Of course, do it all the time. But I'm going to understand that there's a risk that if it doesn't work out, they're not going to like that I keep pushing them, which means that I'm paying very close attention. And if they keep pushing back and keep pushing back, like where's the limit at which I say, okay, I trust you now. You've tried it enough. You still hate it. I'm not going to push you anymore. There's no right answer to that. But depending on how you approach it, it's going to impact when you listen. You're going to make mistakes. Relax. It's what happens. Babies are very fragile, like we were just talking about. Humans are also incredibly resilient. We all fall and hit our heads. Like, we're built for that.
Yeah.
And even if that means that you're not as smart as you could have otherwise been, what the hell are you talking about? You got to go to an alternate dimension in which the kid did not fall on their head and see what that person's like and compare. Like, it's a thing that happens. We don't like it to happen, so we try to prevent it. Sometimes we don't realize that there's something that we needed to pay attention to in order to prevent it, and so we don't pay attention and don't prevent it, and it happens. And then you say, oh, okay, good to know. I should not let them play by that thing like that again. Instead of, oh, I'm the worst and I've ruined my kid's life because they were going to be a genius and now they're not. Like, what are we talking about?
That's an inordinate amount of pressure on yourself and on your kid.
Yes.
That.
Well, kids are all depressed and anxious these days. Yeah, because they're being told that every piece of homework they do will ruin their life. If I don't get good grades, then I won't get into a good school. And if I don't get into a good school, I won't get a good job, and I won't make any good money, and I won't have the kind of life that I want to have. Which means if you do this homework, you'll be happy for the rest of your life. And if you don't, you'll be sad for the rest of your life. If I gave you any task and you genuinely believe, because you were hearing it your whole life, not just from me, but from everybody, if I give you any task and you genuinely believe that completion of that task is the difference between you having a happy life for the rest of your life, decades and decades, or having a terrible life for the rest of your life, are you going to want me to give you that task?
I'd be like a deer in the headlights if it was me.
Yeah. Imagine someone just gave you a button and said, if you push this button, you'll be happy. And if you don't, you won't. Even if it's that simple, if you genuinely believe it, every time you see that button, you'd be like, oh God, oh God, oh God, everybody shut up, everybody shut up.
Mhm.
I got to push this button. And if I give you anything that's that important, then you have to shut everything else out of your life. All that other stuff that, by the way, serves some purpose, theoretically, or you wouldn't be noticing it, you wouldn't be enjoying it. It does something for you. But now you got to shut it out because you just got to push this button for 2 hours a day. Come on, you're capable. I don't want to push the damn button. You know how to push the button. You just don't want to. You are capable of pushing the button. I know I'm capable of pushing the button. There are other things too, though. And you keep putting something in front of me for 2 hours a day and telling me if I don't do this thing, I'm ruining my life. So of course I'm going to do it. But if, for example, one of the things that I cut out in order to make room for that is sleeping, then I'll be more tired the next day and a little more tired the next. If I sleep less than I otherwise would have, I will get more and more and more and more tired as time goes on. And eventually, even pushing the button becomes very difficult. But it's so important that I can't sleep, which would make it a lot easier. Yeah, talking to friends is rest. Playing video games is rest. Reading books is rest. Sleeping and napping is rest. Doing the things that you enjoy is rest. If we tell people, especially kids, that doing the things that you enjoy actually detracts from your ability to do what is important, then they will get worse and worse and worse over time. They'll still do it, but it will cost them more. And eventually their ability to do it will slip, because that's why we rest. Not because we like it. We like it because it is necessary. Anyway, going on and on.
Well,
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, eventually things they might even like doing at school or whatever start to feel like punishment because there's no room for rest.
Couldn't tell you how many people I've talked to that are like, oh, I used to love reading. I was a voracious reader in middle school. Now I never read.
Yeah.
And nobody, like, we just treat that like it's an individual thing. You got to rediscover your love for reading. Why is nobody saying, if this many people who love to read go to high school and then never read again, maybe there's something about that experience that intrinsically is at least very likely to kill someone's love for reading. And if we think it's a good thing to love reading, which we do, or we wouldn't be teaching it the way we are, then maybe we should address the thing that we're doing that kills people's love of it. Anyway, instead of just telling everyone, no. Even though everyone responds to this the same way, you're still wrong for responding this way. How many people have to tell you that what you're doing hurts before you stop thinking, all these people are so weird that they're responding like this thing hurts them even though it doesn't? How many people have to say it hurts before you say, I guess this thing hurts people even though it doesn't seem like it should?
Yeah.
All right. Good to be with you.
And you. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks for your comments. And hopefully see you this time next week, if not sooner.
Yeah. All right. Goodbye, viewers.
Bye, everybody.